And welcome back to CAV Radio. I'm your host, Chris Perkins, and I'm here with my co-hosts, Mark Cummins and Jeff Giles.
Hello again.
Hello, we are back.
Ooh.
Little extra long 10 o'clock break. Give everybody a chance to regroup or whatever. Nice. Refresh, re-up, however you want to recharge, whatever word you want to use.
I went to run out to my truck to grab some cigarettes in my truck, and it is pouring fucking rain out there.
Yeah, I hear it. I got the window open down here, and it is pouring.
Down there in the bunker?
Down in my bunker. Yeah, down in my bunker. I got the window open in my bunker, and and I cannot hear the rain. It's a pretty shitty bunker, if that's the case.
Yeah, no doubt.
Jeff must have built it for me.
Right. Me and my fucking carpenter skills. How's it going over there anyway?
It's going.
Good. I see you got the air mattress replaced with the real bed. That's good.
Yep.
So it's got to be good, yeah.
Absolutely. So we'll connect to our guest. I'm assuming that this caller would be the guest. So it must be Mike. It's showing up California area code, so I wasn't 100% sure because Mike lives in Hawaii. But there's only one way to find out. Hello, how's it going?
It's going just fine. Aloha, nui, nui, nui. And yes, I have a Los Angeles exchange for one of my phone lines. I tried the Skype button on Blog Talk Radio, and it just kept taking me to the page to set up my own radio show, and I know that's not what you wanted me to do, so I called in.
Mike, Blog Talk Radio it's been giving us a lot of issues lately. We're trying to move away from it. We're kind of weaning ourselves off it right now.
Won't be much longer till we're gone.
Well, we do. We keep running, and there's always something, even if it's something minor like this.
Oh.
It's kind of a pain to deal with something new like every show with them. I mean, you know what I'm saying, Mike?
Yeah, it's the infrastructure as a whole is really crumbling. When I was doing my show yesterday on RBN, all of our internet streams went down and didn't get up until early this morning. Some kind of a technical error there. I understand our satellite feed went down today. It's just rough living in this sort of third world nation where all of the infrastructure is being allowed to rot away so that they can spend the money on bombs and bullets.
Right. Yeah.
Priorities.
Perfectly said. Yeah, definitely.
So, what do you want to talk about?
I guess we'll focus on the Federal Reserve tonight. I'll start off by I happen to be. I don't normally. I watch the History Channel a lot, but I was watching America's Book of Secrets, and I didn't know that you were on it, and so I was watching it, and you popped up one night, and I was like, oh, no kidding, and I was like, yeah, that's maybe we should get Mike on to get into the Federal Reserve and gold and all that stuff, because that would, if I was going to say if I had the choice, but I do have the choice. So I had the choice, so I figured I would get you on to get into this a little bit more. But Jeff and Mark, I know Mark's got a few questions for you before we get going. Mark?
Oh, yeah. No, I'm right here. Multitasking.
Yeah. Before we get going, I know you had a couple questions for Mike.
Well, no, actually, I mean, I'd like to just kind of jump right into, kind of what the show's about, getting into the reserve
Is that what
here.
is that what you're, okay, all right, my bad.
Yeah, no,
okay.
Excuse me.
Okay, well, let me just start off right here from the beginning.
Okay.
The issue with the Federal Reserve is that it is a privately owned central bank that has basically usurped the money creation authority normally vested in the United States government by the Constitution. And when this nation was started, the model for the economy was the government would create a uniform monetary system, spend the currency into circulation to buy what the government needed. The money would flow through commerce without accruing any interest to a private bank, and then be taxed back at the end of the cycle to balance the books. This is an economy that works for the people and the nation. It's the public currency handled as a public utility. Now, the private central banks have a different model. They basically loan all of the public currency at interest, and as a result of this simple device, the debt owed to that private central bank grows faster than the available money supply. So it doesn't matter how hard you work, you can never pay that debt off. What's really interesting is this is exactly the same kind of predatory banking system the United States fought a revolution to break free of, only to be sold back into that same slavery about 100 years ago by a corrupted Congress and a corrupted president. And what most people need to understand is the Federal Reserve is not part of the government. It's a privately owned bank. It's no more federal than Federal Express. But they sort of took that name to try and convince ordinary Americans that this is somehow part of the government, and we should just sort of go along with this system in which we're paying interest on the public currency, which really does belong to the American people, or should belong to the American people. So every nation with the same sort of private central bank is now drowning hopelessly in debt. We're seeing it all across the European Union. The European nations are now fighting back. If you were following the results of the recent European Union elections, all of the anti-European Union parties, the separatist parties like the Catalonia Separatist Party in Spain, they're all sweeping the elections. It's a huge embarrassment. And basically, the people of the world have come to understand that this particular system of banking is designed to impoverish the people and enrich the bankers without the bankers having to give anything of any real substance back to society. And so this is basically where we are right now, where we're beginning to recognize that these private central banks don't serve the people, they don't serve the nation, they serve themselves, and this, of course, ties into this growing scandal about the gold bullion. Now, if you saw that episode of America's Book of Secrets on History 2, The Gold Conspiracy, it is now becoming quite evident that these various gold central banks, like the New York Federal Reserve, the Bank of France, and the Bank of England, have been accepting for safekeeping gold bullion belonging to other nations. Then they turn around and they're leasing it out the back door to satisfy gold futures contracts as part of this plan to always keep gold prices down, to keep people in the stock market, to keep people in their savings account. And it's now pretty much obvious gold prices are being rigged, silver prices are being rigged, and more nations are now coming to these central banks and saying, we want to see and count our gold bullion, because these gold depositories operate just like a safety deposit box. You go in there, you're paying a storage fee, you put your items in the box, and at any time you should be able to go in and at least look at them or take them back out. But when Germany asked for their gold bullion back, the New York Federal Reserve and the Bank of France both hemmed and hawed and said, well, you know, it's going to take us years and years to get that back. And then Germany said, can we at least look at our bullion? And the New York Federal Reserve said, no, you can't even look at it. And that's why everybody is all of a sudden very concerned. Only today, Austria informed the Bank of England they're sending a delegation to examine their gold bullion and make sure it's really there. And this may be the beginning of a gold rush on all of these banks who have been taking other people's gold bullion and profiting from leasing it, lending it, pledging it as collateral. These are all things they're not supposed to be doing with the gold bullion that's on deposit in their depositories. And it's a huge, huge scandal. It basically shows that these financial centers and these private central banks are operating on a criminal level. They're basically playing financial games with other people's property, and it's finally starting to catch up with them.
But don't you think it's a little naive of these other countries to trust our country with their gold?
I think it was very naive, but you need to understand that at the end of World War II, when they were pushing this whole new Cold War and this idea that the Soviet Union could invade Europe, a lot of these European countries were convinced to put their gold on deposit in the New York Federal Reserve for safekeeping. We know that a huge amount of gold bullion was taken out of Ukraine and sent to New York, possibly to try and cover the shortages for Germany and Austria and 5 other countries that are asking for their gold bullion. We know that when the U.S. invaded Libya and shut down the gold dinar, the gold that was going to back that has now vanished, and everybody's just scrambling trying to find gold to make up this huge shortfall. 1 week after Germany demanded their gold back from the Bank of France, France invaded Mali in Africa, which is Africa's 3rd largest gold producer. So it doesn't really get any more obvious than that.
Okay. We were discussing a little bit at the beginning of the show about the Federal Reserve, and one of my complaints was that when it was created, that they put it into law that we would never know who the actual owners are, because it's private owners. The names of the owners were supposed to be kept private, so we could never know who the owners are. And so I laugh at the idea that Warren Buffett and Bill Gates are supposedly the most richest people. I mean, the people who actually own the Federal Reserve and these other central banks, they have to be, you think they'd have to be worth a couple $1 trillion at least, right?
Oh, yeah, it's an amazing amount of money that they have leached out of every nation that is enslaved to this private central bank, and that is why the Federal Reserve has fought every single effort to demand an audit, even to the point of basically threatening that if there's an audit of the Federal Reserve, they will crash the economy. Right. And so they're definitely down to the resort of terroristic threatening to try and keep their secrets. But absolutely the reality is that the owners of these private central banks probably are the richest people on earth. They're using their wealth and their political influence, and they're using the accumulated debt to basically control governments. I think a really good example would be Greece, which just now was forced to put up 110 of their public beaches for sale to try and pay off this artificially created unpayable debt. And the goal of the bankers is to basically just use ink and paper to eventually acquire ownership of all of the real assets of the world, all the land, all the buildings, all the homes, all the factories. They're trying to basically bring back serfdom and feudalism, where instead of the American people owning the land they live on, the land will own the American people that are forced to work on it. And it really is, when you talk about this clash of civilizations that is being used to promote this war agenda, what it really is a war between banking systems, between the public currency as a public utility versus the public currency as a privatized for-profit money-making opportunity. Now, a lot of people would argue that the Federal Reserve gaining control of the issuance of the U.S. currency was unconstitutional because the Constitution vests Congress with the authority to coin money and to regulate its value, and it does not explicitly allow the government to delegate or transfer that authority. So absent a new constitutional amendment, the Federal Reserve Act was illegal and unconstitutional, and our economy was hijacked, the public currency transferred to the ownership of these private bankers, and they've been milking the American people for trillions of dollars of profits ever since.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely, exactly.
Right. And all these central banks, they are connected to somehow, right? I would think it's not just which is the main bank? Is it the Federal Reserve or is it the Bank of England? Do they all
no,
go
it's
back?
the bank. It's the Bank of International Settlements. That's the tip of the Federal Reserve, or rather the private central banking network. It's all very much tied in with the Rothschild family, and they have been playing this game on planet Earth and humanity for centuries. And basically, any country that tries to break free of private central banking, war is made on it, or their leaders are assassinated. These money junkies will do anything, including a world war, to keep the world enslaved to their system of banking.
Michael, can you say that name one more time for me, real quick? I'm sorry.
Which one? The Rothschilds?
Bank
the
of
Rothschild family?
Bank of Central Investments, I think it was.
Yeah, the Bank of
the Bank of International Settlements. That's the private central bank's private central bank.
Thank you. international settlement.
So
Yes.
these families, such as the Rothschilds and all their offshoots, do you suspect that they might be working for like a royal interests? Because it does seem that from the start of this that it was somehow connected to royalty.
Well, basically, the royalty in Europe, because they technically owned the money, they worked hand in glove with these bankers to always be accruing more wealth from their subjects. And that is why when the United States won the revolution against Britain, it did a lot of revolutionary things, including no state religion and this model of a government-issued value-based currency. And that was absolute precedent-setting. And it wasn't just the American Revolution. Abraham Lincoln tried to do the same thing. Now, if you go over to my website, whatreallyhappened.com, and up at the top you're going to see an article, All Wars Are Bankers' Wars. And in it, it's a history of the United States, all the wars and assassinations told from the point of view of the financial interests that drive these events. And, every American president who has tried to stand up to these bankers there's been an assassination attempt on them. Andrew Jackson shut down the Second Bank of the United States. They tried to kill him. Abraham Lincoln had his greenback. They did kill him and take the greenbacks out of circulation. John F. Kennedy issued Executive Order 11110, which called for the U.S. Treasury to issue a new value-based currency called the United States note. 5 months later, he was killed in Dealey Plaza, Dallas, Texas, and on the Warren Commission sat John J. McCloy, president of the Chase Manhattan Bank, president of the World Bank, and I don't care how good a banker he is, he's not be investigating the murder of a U.S. president, so he had to be there to make sure that the agenda from the Federal Reserve to get rid of the United States note was never made public. Oh, it's just a crazed lone nut in a Texas bookstore.
Wow. Huh. That's so this kind of sounds. I saw that video documentary from, I think, Bill Stills was his name. Would you agree with his assessment on for the most part?
I'm not familiar with this documentary. What was his basic thesis?
It sounds very close to what you're saying. Basically, that we, as far as historically, and the people who stood up against the Federal Reserve, and he spoke about how the attempts for Congress to issue their own money supply before the war and during the war, and how during the war the agents from the United Kingdom sent over people to infiltrate and basically pollute our money supply with a bunch of counterfeit money. And
Well, they didn't really need to do it with counterfeit money. What they wanted to basically do was remove from the government the authority to issue its own currency and force them back to borrowing from the private bankers. Now, one of their key agents in place at the start of the United States was Alexander Hamilton, and his constant insistence that the United States couldn't run unless it was borrowing money from the banks of Europe. It was one of the many issues that led to the duel with Aaron Burr. But again, the U.S. economy, when the nation started, was considered extraordinarily revolutionary, and it was very much a hammer blow to the private central bankers' control of the world through control of the currency. And the Constitution was explicitly written to say the government will coin and issue the money and regulate the value, not the private bankers. And the bankers came in and basically tried to get their little banking schemes going. They started the first Bank of the United States. It ran for 20 years, and it drove the nation to the edge of bankruptcy. Congress refused to renew the charter. And the Rothschild family, the head of the Bank of England, said, if you do not renew our charter, you will be in a war. And Congress stood firm, refused to renew the charter for the first Bank of the United States. The next year was the War of 1812. Even though the United States won the War of 1812, it plunged the nation into so much debt, the only way they could get out of it was to charter the second Bank of the United States of America. And that ran for 20 years, and once again, the bankers grew rich and the American people were driven into poverty. And Andrew Jackson ran on his second term in office on the slogan, Jackson and no bank. And he made it the signature accomplishment of his second term in office to basically revoke the charter of the Second Bank of the United States, at which point there was an immediate attempt on his life. Now, when Abraham Lincoln was dealing with the seceding Confederacy, he faced some serious problems. The banks wanted to charge him 30% per year interest to finance the Civil War, and he said, I'm not going to enslave the white man to the bankers to free the black man, and he invoked his authority as President of the United States of America and had the Treasury issue a government currency, the greenback. And the editorials that came out of the financial press in Europe were absolutely excoriating and said, this has to be destroyed or it's going to destroy all the royal families and banking families in Europe. And as a matter of fact, the banking clans of Europe supported the Confederacy against the Union on the condition that when they defeated Lincoln, the greenback would be taken out of circulation and the Confederate States of America would always agree to have a private central bank issuing the public currencies alone at interest. What stopped these European bankers from intervening, and by the way, France and Britain both actually considered directly invading the United States in support of the Confederacy, but they were actually held at bay by Russia. Little piece of history that you're not going to get in the public schools. Russia had just gotten rid of their central banks and adopted an economy based on that of the United States, and Russia sent warships to sail patrols off both coasts of the United States to keep France and Britain from invading. So the Confederacy was defeated, and Lincoln was assassinated and his greenbacks taken out of circulation, and once again everybody had to go to banks and borrow the currency at interest before they could conduct any business.
Wow. So, okay. Know where to start. That was a lot right there. So, so I had a question from earlier. Where do you think this is all going? I mean, because I saw an interview with George Soros a few months back, and he was mentioning that he wants to see the U.S. economy, the dollar, brought down, and he actually mentioned wanting to see an international, like a one-world currency type deal take over.
Well, the question is, how is that currency created? You see, when you are forced to go to a private bank and borrow the currency before you conduct commerce at interest, then that bank is getting a mafia-like piece of the action of everything that you do in exchange for paper and ink. And that's what the Federal Reserve Act did to the American people. You have to all U.S. currency enter circulation as a loan at interest from the Federal Reserve, and that interest has to be paid back. That's where all this skyrocketing debt is coming from. Now, what the Federal Reserve Act did to the American people, the post-World War II Bretton Woods Agreement did to the rest of planet Earth. It said the dollar is now the global trade and banking currency, but before you can engage in global trade and banking, you have to first come to the Federal Reserve and borrow those dollars at interest. So the U.S. financial system was getting a piece of the action off of commerce all over the world in which they had no actual part and contributed nothing of value. It's just a mechanism by which they get a piece of the action of everybody's commerce and industry around the globe. Now, of course, the rest of the world has picked up on this is what's been going on. And we're seeing country after country trying to break away from the U.S. dollar. And the U.S. has tried to sort of prop up Bretton Woods with a second scam called the petrodollar, by which they take control of resource-rich areas of the world and say you can only sell those resources for the U.S. dollar. So once again, other countries have to come to the Federal Reserve, borrow those dollars at interest before they can go and buy the oil and resources. Now, in 2002, Saddam Hussein got permission from the United Nations to sell Iraq's oil for the euro. 1 year later, the U.S. invades, they lynch Saddam Hussein, Iraq's oil's back on the world market, but only for U.S. dollars. Muammar Gaddafi set up a state central bank and a value-based currency, the gold dinar, then announced that Libya's oil was for sale, but only for the gold dinar. They invade Libya, they kill Gaddafi, Libya's oil's back on the world market, but only for the U.S. dollar. That is the reason for all of these wars we're seeing all across the globe carried out by the United States of America to make sure that the world's resources are for sale only for U.S. dollars, to force these other nations to come and borrow those dollars at interest from the Federal Reserve. So the U.S. economy, primarily Wall Street, of course, is just automatically getting huge amounts of wealth from this mafia-like piece of the action of everybody else's commerce. But the rest of the world is really getting tired of it. The rapprochement between Russia and China has created a new economic power that is already turning away from the dollar. They're promoting the ruble and the yuan as global currencies. We have something like 80 nations have now aligned with the BRICS movement, movement. They're getting ready to simply drop the dollar. And without that mafia-like piece of the action, the United States economy is going to crumble because we've gotten so dependent on this piece of the action scam. The petrodollar and Bretton Woods, we've allowed our manufacturing to decline, and we've just allowed this horrible experiment with GMOs to destroy our agricultural exports. We don't have anything else to run the nation on but this piece of the action scam, and that's why they're pushing forward with more and more wars.
Wow. So a lot of people mentioned before, the three powers in the world are military, which is Washington, D.C., religious, which would be the Vatican, and the third would be banking, which they claim to be in London. So could all these three, these power structures, could they be working together? I mean, could we be taking orders from the Vatican? Would it be that? And another question I have is, a lot of people claim, money is the ultimate motive behind everything. But I've always argued that these people already have all the money in the world, so what's the purpose then if it's not for money? It's not, control, they already have it under control for the most part. And you're claiming
you've really hit on it. By throwing people into the illusion of debt, you can control them. It's a new form of governance, rule by compound interest, and it's really no more a legitimate form of governance than rule by divine right or rule by slavery. And like those earlier systems, it only works if the people are brainwashed into thinking this is the way the world is supposed to be. And, basically the system is set up to always create more debt than can ever be paid off in order to basically say to the government, look, you owe us so many trillions of dollars, you have to do what I tell you now. And you have to make your people do what we tell them now. And that's really what it's all about, is enslavement.
Of course.
This could all work out, though, if the state were to print and issue its own money without the central banks being involved, correct?
Well, that's exactly it, and every country that tries to issue its own currency comes under attack. Germany in the 1930s would be a good example. During the height of the Weimar Republic, when they were still suffering under the private central bank imposed on them by the Treaty of Versailles, Germany's hyperinflation was through the roof. They were taking literally wheelbarrows worth of banknotes to buy a loaf of bread. When the Nazis came to power, and I'm not trying to glorify the Nazis, but when they came to power, they kicked out the private central bank, and they went with the early American model of a government-issued value-based currency. And it so transformed Germany's economy, it was being called the German miracle in the Western press. Time magazine had Hitler as their man of the year, I think in 1939, for the amazing transformation of Germany's economy. And all he had done was cut off that piece of the action to the private central bank, which is why the private central bankers declared a global boycott against Germany, trying to crush it down, because people in other countries are saying, look, this is working really good in Germany. Why aren't we doing that here? Why are we still working with this idea that we have to go to a private bank and borrow money before we conduct business?
Right.
Okay. All right, Chris?
Yeah, we got to skip to a break here. A little past the 10:30 mark, so yeah, we will skip to a quick break, everybody, and we will return.
When you think about your iPhone, it's probably the object that you use most in your life. It's the product that you have with you all the time. With this unique relationship people have with their iPhone, we take changing it really seriously. We don't want to just make a new phone. We want to make a much better phone.
And we call it the iPhone 5S. The S stands for same. We think you're really going to love it. Take a look.
First came the iPod, then a slightly thinner iPod, then a tinier iPod, then a taller, thinner iPod, then a taller, thinner iPod that shuffles your songs, then a pink one, a blue one, a green one, then an even smaller iPod, then a wider iPod, then an iPod you can touch, then an iPod you can talk on, then an iPod you can talk on with a G on it, then a shorter, fatter iPod, then a shorter, fatter iPod that shuffles, then a thinner iPod you can talk on with a 4 on it, then a gigantic iPod you cannot talk on. Then a gigantic iPod you cannot talk on that's a little faster. Then a white one. Oh my god, oh my god, oh my god. White. Then a thinner, taller iPod you can talk on. And now a bigger, but not gigantic iPod you cannot talk on. We're Apple, and you're suckers. Don't forget to buy a new charger.
Busted! Are you tired of games that are fun? Yes, me too. Fun sucks! Stand aside, action and excitement. There's a new sheriff in town, and his name is Farmville. From milking cows to putting chickens in coops, this game pushes the limits of the imagination. Backward! Here's a taste of the action. Farmville! It's about damn time. It's just like being a real farmer, only without the benefit. Farmville! Play Farmville to get out of dealing with issues, spending time with your children, or farming. Farmville! Where did the time go? Farmville! Designed by Kronos himself to alleviate the burden of time. Farmville! Just listen to these testimonials from my mom. Hey Mom, what do you think of Farmville? What? Farmville! What do you want for your birthday, little girl? Farmville cash! Worth as much as real money, after it accidentally dropped into a volcano! Farmville! What's that? You found a golden chicken, posted on Facebook to alienate your friend! Farmville! Old MacDonald had a Farmville! Hey Toby, could you run up to the... Farmville! Somebody help me stop saying Farmville!
Try holding your breath.
Farmville! Subscribe.
Farm.
You're listening to CAB Radio 2.0.
Hey, we're back, everybody.
Excellent.
Mark, you made it back to the line, I see. Mark ran downstairs real quick down to here.
Down to the bunker.
Down to my bunker. He came down. He was out of food rations.
So Michael, what happens next? I mean, when everybody really wakes up as they already are, and they're taking their gold bullion and they're running with it, and the dollar is absolutely worth nothing, and which when everybody wakes up to this, what's going to happen? Is it going to be complete collapse, chaos?
Actually, I think the opposite is going to happen, because up until now, over the last couple of centuries of this private central banking scam, all of these nations with private central banks operated independently. And when any one nation would either the private bank would collapse, or the people would revolt and kick out the private central bank, which is what happened when the United States was formed, all of the other nations enslaved to private central banks would immediately pile on and force them back to private central banking. But today is very different because of this push for economic globalization, because all of these private central banks, the Federal Reserve, the European Central Bank, the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, the Bank of International Settlements, they are now all linked together through cross trades, and especially through what are called derivatives. So when it comes down, we have a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to see the whole private central banking system collapse at the same time. And we have to be absolutely adamant that we not allow it to get started again. We're over here. We're working on a project called the Blueprint for the New America, and it's basically how are we going to restart the nation after it's all over. And right at the top of the list of things to do, no more private central banks. And, of course, they're going to try and restart the scam, and we must be on guard for that because these money junkies, they're not concerned with humanity. They're perfectly willing to send millions of people to die in a world war as long as it keeps the rest of the world enslaved to their little ink and paper game. But I really do see that when this system comes down, it's going to crash across the globe at the same time. Now, getting back to the comment about George Soros wanting a global currency, that's either good or bad depending upon where that currency is being issued. Because we certainly know that the globalists and the New World Order people envision a global version of a private central bank issuing all of the world's currencies alone at interest, which would permanently trap all of mankind in slavery to these bankers, and that absolutely cannot be allowed to happen.
Right. What do you? Sorry, Mark. Go on.
No, I apologize. And people, they're ushering that in. People want it. People will, because it'll, save mankind. That's how they'll usher it in.
Oh, yeah.
Well, only because they're taught to believe that they have to go to a bank to get currency to use as a medium of exchange. Yeah. And that's that belief that traps them in that system. Now, I'm opposed to one world government and global government simply because that kind of power concentration is going to attract people that absolutely should not have that kind of power. I would see the future of the planet, the future of humanity best served by a planet with 1,000 or 2,000 small countries, each taking care of their own people, and thereby not able to go out and do empire games and enslavement games. You need to understand that national borders serve the same function for planet Earth that fireproof doors do in buildings and watertight bulkheads do in ships. They contain problems so the system as a whole is not threatened. If you prop open the fireproof doors in a building or if you lock open the doors in the watertight bulkheads in the ship, it seems like things are better because you can get around faster and faster. But the first fire destroys the whole building. The first leak sinks the entire ship. And we have seen this disaster of globalization already when the collapse of the 2008 mortgage-backed security fraud didn't just crush Wall Street, it spread to Europe and all over the world because all of these banks were trading in each other's financial instruments, and the economic downturn was not contained just to the United States, which created the mess. It infected pretty much the entire world. And so this idea of globalism is great for the people who want to stand on top of a pyramid built to their own glory and scream, "I'm the king of the world." But for ordinary human beings across the globe, I think a multitude of smaller countries is really going to be better in terms of maintaining peace and prosperity.
Can I agree. Mike, what's your take on Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies? Do you think that plays a role in this whole one world currency type deal?
Well, I think any alternative currency is going to be a good thing if it starts pulling power and control away from the privately owned central banks. My concern about Bitcoin is that being virtual, it is open to manipulation. We've seen all kinds of hacker attacks and crimes. And I think basically we need to go back to a coinage or that has an intrinsic value. Because that's a system where, when you earned your money and it was paid to you in silver coinage, once it was in your hand, neither the government nor the bankers could change what that money was worth. Right. And then once we went into this reserve system, the government and the banks can manipulate the worth of that money to their own ends. We're seeing that today with quantitative easing, where the Federal Reserve is just creating billions of dollars every month out of thin air to shower all over the federal government and Wall Street. And every time they do that, the money in your pocket, the money you've already worked for, the money you've already saved, the money you've already got buried in a mayonnaise jar out by the pineapple plantation is losing value. It's like the chairman of the Federal Reserve is Lord Voldemort, and he waves his wand, and real worth vanishes from your pocket.
Yep.
So what do you think about Ron Paul's attempt in 2012 and how he got shot down at the RNC and basically how right in our faces everything seemed rigged?
Well, it did, not only in 2012, but definitely in 2008. I was a Ron Paul supporter. He was saying all the things that were wrong with the country. He was very honest about the problems with the Federal Reserve, and that's why they basically colluded to make sure he never got there, to basically make sure that the only people running for office in this country are ones who've already sold their souls to the private central bankers, are already obedient to Israel, are already obedient to the war agenda. We don't really have honest elections in this country because by the time we get to the ballot box, the only candidates that are left there are all part of the problem. We saw the same thing just with the elections this last weekend in Ukraine, where the Ukrainian people basically had a lineup of the junta, the people who'd overthrown the elected government. They stood up and said, "We're all candidates, pick one."
So do you think if he was if he was headstrong with his, if he didn't bow out lightly, and if he actually kept trying to push, do you think, what if he actually made it Ron Paul? Do you think he would have been assassinated? And what about his son?
They would have shot him right out of the nomination the way they did Bobby Kennedy.
Right.
And I'm sure Ron Paul is smart enough to know that. And, Ron Paul doesn't want to see the U.S. system destroyed, even as corrupt as it has become. And I think he basically backed off rather than risk a crisis that would really have caused a great deal of suffering and strife. However, Ron Paul's good intentions notwithstanding, I think we're on that crisis anyway.
Right.
Right. And what are your thoughts on Rand? I'm kind of curious.
Well, Rand is definitely not his father. He says some things I like. He says a lot of things I don't like. His obeisance to Israel, which seems to be the price for anybody to achieve elected office in this country these days, is something I don't agree with. He is certainly not standing up to the Federal Reserve the way his father did. I did admire the way he stood up and said that, his father was the victim of election fraud in both 2008 and 2012.
Right. Do you think there's any chance that Rand will actually change anything? Because a lot of people think he's just getting his foot in the door and that he could actually do a lot of good things for the liberty movement.
Well, time will tell. Time will solve that mystery. We just have to wait and see what's going on. But I think we've all had enough experience with politicians who get up there and say one thing and then do something completely else when elected. Obama's a good example. I think it's absurd that the Supreme Court is actually considering declaring campaign promises to be protected free speech, so that when a politician gets up and he lies to you during the campaign, you can't call him on the lie or you can be cited for infringing on his right to freedom of speech. At the same time, we've got Senator Chuck Schumer up there saying that freedom of speech should only be allowed for the controlled corporate media, not for the independent media, not for ordinary citizens.
Right.
What kind of bullshit is that?
That's right. That's a hit on the internet right there. I mean, if that goes through, I mean, they're going to keep trying. I mean,
they're afraid. They're afraid of the internet, and as a matter of fact, I've been doing this for 20 years now, and apparently there were some memos that were just recently released from the Clinton Presidential Library that said all the way back there in the mid-1990s, they were absolutely shocked and appalled that Americans were all of a sudden able to get facts and information about what was going on that didn't come through the filters of corporate media or government propaganda announcements. But even though they were aware of it, they're still following the same model of lying to the people to try and get what they want. But these days, the life expectancy of a government lie can be clocked with an egg timer, whether it's Saddam's nuclear weapons or Assad's chemical weapons or 6% unemployment or human-caused global warming. And I think the government has realized the American people don't trust them, don't believe them, are not going to go along with what the government says, and they're trying to find some way to get the American people back under control, not by telling the truth, but by simply finding a way to silence all alternative views.
I remember you saying that you're against GMOs. That's awesome. I mean, I don't think enough people are. Although there are a lot, I'm talking activists. There's not too many activists who are anti-GMO, or at least if they are, they don't express it as much. So what do you think the future is at? I mean, about the recent attempts, the march against Monsanto, all the people being outraged.
Well, more and more research around the world is showing that GMOs are very dangerous. The problem is that when, DNA is very self-referential. When you tinker with one part of the DNA, it's going to trigger changes all over the organism, not just the desired outcome, and nobody is looking for those. And I'll give you one example. The GMO corn, it turned out the stalks of the corn are much tougher and sturdier than normal corn, to where the farmers have to buy Kevlar tires for their tractors to keep them from being punctured. And it shows it shows the incredible unpredictability of this technology. We know that Monsanto basically just does a quick test and says, all right, the rats didn't die in 3 months, therefore this stuff is safe. And then you have these other studies done in Ireland and France and Russia showing that, when the rats are allowed to live their entire lifespan, they do get serious medical problems. But Monsanto is out to make money. They're dealing with the fact that other countries will no longer import GMO agriculture from the U.S. Other countries are outright banning or labeling GMO. So Monsanto is going to try and recover their investment by conniving with the U.S. government to force Americans to eat GMO. They're trying to ban GMO labeling nationwide now at the federal level to head off all these states like Vermont that are now saying, people have a right to know if the food they're eating is GMO or not. And it's all about the money. And they really don't care about the harm their products are causing. It's just all about the money, whether it's GMO or bad vaccines or caustic chemicals in cosmetic and household products or chemical additives to food that really are not very good for your health.
Oh, I'd say if anything, they do it. They want it because it produces more profits on the other end.
Well,
you're absolutely right. The big pharmaceutical, the medical industrial complexes, I like to call it, they would collapse if Americans were all healthy. Their business model needs us to constantly be chronically ill.
So, Mike,
exactly.
You bring up profit, but could Monsanto, could these pharmaceutical companies, could they all just be offshoots of these banking interests?
Well, they're all certainly tied in with the banking interest. They get lines of credit. These big financial firms are buying and selling their stock like crazy. But I think it's a cautionary tale for the future that when any one entity, whether it's a bank or an investment firm or a corporation, gets too much money, they're going to use that to basically skew society to their own benefit, often at great harm to the rest of the nation. And we understand that corporations are going to behave like this. The original job of the federal government was to act as an umpire and a mediator, balancing the greed and desire for profits of corporations with the general good of the nation. But in our case, the government has completely abandoned maintaining that overview. They're totally on the side of corporate profitability, and that is the classic definition of fascism.
Mm-hmm. Sure is.
Wow. So what are your views on the future? Are you optimistic or pessimistic? I mean, do you think we're going to go through hell to get to heaven first? Is it going to be, like a huge catastrophe?
Well, that's actually the best outcome. Is we're going to have to suffer through a massive economic collapse of the U.S. system and the death of the dollar. And if we study very carefully the collapse of the Soviet Union, the Russian people had to deal with severe hardship for about 3 or 4 months. Then they formed the new Russian republics, and they're doing much better now than they were before. That would be the best possible outcome I see for the United States. The alternative view is that they're going to find a way to really ramp up this world war across the globe, which the U.S. is really not equipped to win in the conventional sense. We don't have the manpower, we don't have the money, we don't have the manufacturing. The weapons that are being produced by the U.S. right now are very expensive, and they're not very good. F-22, F-25, Independence-class littoral ships. The new Gerald R. Ford carrier, they still can't get that out of the dry dock. And then that means at some point the U.S. is going to resort to its nuclear arsenal. And that's going to be a really bad day for anybody not wearing 2 million sunblock.
Right.
And regardless of whether it goes nuclear or not, I think the United States is going to lose this war, and they're going to lose big time. So given a choice between all-out World War III, including nukes, and a financial collapse of the Federal Reserve and the U.S. government, I think obviously the financial collapse is going to kill far fewer people.
Right. It would still kill a lot, though, because, most Americans aren't equipped to handle a collapse. We all live in cities, and we're dependent on the government and grocery stores.
And that's definitely being encouraged because the government wants you dependent on them and the corporations so that you won't stand up and say, hey, this is really messed up. We're seeing the Bureau of Land Management out there in the West trying to shut down all the independent cattle ranches. They're going after small organic farmers. They're literally telling people they can't grow vegetables on their own property in their homes. They're going after hydroponic gardens and shutting those down. The U.S. government is openly advertising for more people to come onto food stamps, even though the individual allotment is having to be cut. They want you to have to go to the banks for your money. They want you to have to go to Monsanto for your food. They want you to have to go to the U.S. government for your food, and because that will make you dependent, and once you're dependent, you are their slaves.
Of course. Of course. So, hey, which I guess kind of fits into my earlier statement here, Michael. But what about like a third option of kind of like an easy gradual into the one world government? You know, instead of World War III, instead of they just come out and they're like, okay, the dollar is collapsing, we're gonna consolidate everything into one world currency, and instead of this wars, we're just going to consolidate everything and that's, I guess, what I meant by people are going to, kind of buy it up because it's just going to solve
I think if they do, humanity is lost because the one world government is going to behave just like the governments we've got now in the United States and Europe. Just because they're a one world government doesn't mean they're going to suddenly discover ethics and morality and concern for ordinary people. In fact, their attitude of a one world government will be even worse than what we see in Washington, D.C. and Brussels.
Of course. I like what you mentioned about having between 1,000 and 2,000 different separate countries just to keep everything in check so no empires get too huge. But in that situation, how do you stop it from going like it was in the old days when you had countries always at war with each other trying to expand their territory?
Well, I think we'd have the mechanism of, when country A attacks country B, country C and D out of their own self-interest come in and slap down country A. But better small regional conflicts than a global war. I think there is definitely room for a global organization of all the nations in order to keep things under control. But when we allow any one nation to dominate the currency of the world, as the United States has done, mischief will certainly follow.
Right. Plus, you have the internet today. Word spreads fast, and governments don't really get away with as much as they used to. So that's good.
Yeah, and of course the internet and the alternative media are definitely leading us to that world, and that's why they're trying to find some way that they can shut it all down, because all of these governments around the world are all of a sudden realizing that they can no longer lie to their people with impunity. Right. And for a government like the United States of America, where that's all they've done for decades, they're absolutely at a loss what else to do. They can't actually build anything or do anything. They've gotten by so long with frauds about Saddam's nuclear weapons, they literally don't know any other way to try and govern the nation, and that's why they're stuck.
So how long do you think the internet has? I mean, I'm amazed it's lasted this long, to be honest.
I would agree. Part of the problem of trying to predict what's going to go on is we're out here as analysts looking at the world and predicting what it's going to do based on the rules. The problem is the government and the bankers are openly violating the rules and changing the rules, and they're doing things underhanded and out of sight, like the rigging of the gold and silver prices, to perpetuate their power. And because we can't see those aspects, it makes it very hard to say when things are going to fall apart. I think what will happen is the U.S. is going to reach a point of severely annoying all of those BRICS nations and the nations in the Shanghai Cooperative Agreement, and they're just simply going to coordinate and say, on this day, we all drop using the dollar, and at that point, it's all going to fall apart. In fact, I would not be surprised if the United States government was informing these other nations that if they dare drop the dollar, the result will be a nuclear attack.
Right.
So, Michael, is this in the immediate future? Are we going to see this? Us, our children, grandchildren?
Yeah, it feels like it's accelerating. Mostly what's going on here in the United States of America is more and more Americans are standing up and saying, this government isn't legitimate. I don't recognize them. They're not playing by the rules in the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. I'm not going to pay their bills anymore. I'm not going to do what they tell me, and I'm certainly not going to sacrifice the lives of my children in more of these wars of conquest and imperialism.
Right.
we were talking earlier the propaganda on the television, and I was watching it for a few days recently, just like different channels, like trying to get caught up on what everyone else is watching. Not because I wanted to, because I want to get to see what their state of mind is. And it really is another world. Like, it takes isolation to a whole nother level. And all these people, they really do, it's completely creating their lives for them and like living out their lives for them. And they're in this little bubble, and it's real creepy. And that kind of makes me think that it's so effective in its propaganda. Like, it kind of like brings my hope down that we can actually do anything to combat that.
Well, it's kind of interesting because we all remember the movie The Matrix, where we're all plugged into a computer to present an illusion, and we may not be physically plugged into it, but for most ordinary Americans today, 90% of their experience of the world is coming through some screen on their computer, on their tablet, on their cell phone, and, and social media, all of which is bugged and controlled by the NSA. But people are starting to basically put those things down now that they know the government is watching them through that. They're starting to talk to each other, and they're sort of breaking free from the Matrix in that way.
Okay, Mike, what's your take on Edward Snowden and these new revelations and this list that Greenwald wants to bring out of 2 million people that NSA has been? He wants to publish a list of 2 million.
Well,
Americans.
I got to tell you, if I'm not on that list, I'm going to be heartbroken.
Exactly. So,
especially after my NSA challenges.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
So,
yeah. Speaking of that, let's talk about that. What challenge are you? You've been numbering them. What one are you on now?
We're up to number 6. It's out there. The deadline is July 4th. And nobody has succeeded in cracking these. And, I'm not promoting myself as any kind of an expert cryptographer. Right. I'm a moderately decent programmer. But the point of these NSA challenges was really very simple, to prove that the NSA is reading all of our traffic only because they know the methods of the encryption that we buy online and from the computer store, or they have backdoored the systems, and that real criminals and real terrorists who have the resources to do so can easily create encryption that the NSA will not be able to penetrate. And that means that all of this NSA spying, it really is about watching Americans to make sure we're not thinking those double plus ungood thoughts. And that was really the point of the challenges. And I make all the code available. It's put in the public domain. People are free to copy it off and learn from it. But it really isn't that difficult to come up with new encryption methodologies that will defeat the NSA, at least for the amount of time it takes for a criminal or a terrorist to carry out their operation. And, of course, we understand the NSA is completely unable to find the cyber criminals. Apparently somebody's out there, they've deployed this ransomware on Apple devices, iPhones and iPads. NSA can't find them. NSA hasn't caught any of the corrupt CEOs on Wall Street. They can't. They can't. They're all about watching you to try and control you, to keep you silent, to scare us into not talking with each other, and that didn't work. If anything, it made us more and more angry with the government that is absolutely breaking that contract with America called the Bill of Rights.
Right.
This completely reminds me of IBM's involvement in World War II, how they were numbering all the people in their concentration camps and the technology.
Hey, if there's a buck in it, IBM's getting their comeuppance now because China, along with Cisco and Microsoft, China has now banned IBM computers for their banking system because they don't trust that the NSA can't get in there and crash their economy.
Good for them.
Yes.
Good for them. Good. How about that?
Well,
yeah, the NSA revelations have absolutely hammered the American IT industry. Nobody wants to buy American computers or avail themselves of American cloud services. Everybody's switching to all these overseas companies. They're setting up their own internets that don't go through American servers. And our economy was already in sad shape, and computers were big business, and now they're in a free fall because of what the NSA has done.
Wow.
Okay, well, guys, we gotta stop here for a quick break. So
we're
gonna hold this thought.
We will be back, everybody.
Our foreign policy of the past century is deeply flawed and has not served our national security interests. What if we wake up one day and realize that the terrorist threat is a predictable consequence of our meddling in the affairs of others and has nothing to do with us being free and prosperous. What if propping up repressive regimes in the Middle East endangers both the United States and Israel? What if occupying countries like Iraq and Afghanistan and bombing Pakistan is directly related to the hatred directed toward us? What if someday it dawns on us that losing over 5,000 American military personnel in the Middle East since 9/11 is not a fair trade-off for the loss of nearly 3,000 American citizens, no matter how many Iraqi, Pakistani, and Afghan people are killed or displaced? What if we finally decide that torture, even if called enhanced interrogation technique, is self-destructive and produces no useful information, and that contracting it out to a third world nation is just as evil? What if it is finally realized that war and military spending is always destructive to the economy? What if all wartime spending is paid for through the deceitful and evil process of inflating and borrowing? What if we finally see that wartime conditions always undermine personal liberty? What if conservatives who preach small government wake up and realize that our interventionist foreign policy provides the greatest incentive to expand the government? What if conservatives understood once again that their only logical position, military intervention and managing an empire throughout the world? What if the American people woke up and understood that the official reasons for going to war are almost always based on lies and promoted by war propaganda in order to serve special interests? What if we as a nation came to realize that the quest for empire eventually destroys all great nations? What if Obama has no intention of leaving Iraq? What if a military draft is being planned for the wars that will spread if our foreign policy is not changed? What if the American people learn the truth, that our foreign policy has nothing to do with national security, that it never changes from one administration to the next? What if war and preparation for war is a racket serving the special interests? What if President Obama is completely wrong about Afghanistan and turns out worse than Iraq and Vietnam put together? What if Christianity actually teaches peace and not preventive wars of aggression? What if diplomacy is found to be superior to bombs and bribes in protecting America? What happens if my concerns are completely unfounded? Nothing. But what happens if my concerns are justified and ignored? Nothing good.
You know, what are you taking? You don't know what your fucking personality is like? Why don't you go sit down in the grass by yourself and think about shit? You know, take a goddamn meditation class. At a certain point in time as a human being, you become responsible for your own biology. You know, and that's what we don't teach people. What we need to teach kids in school, there needs to be, you know, you have math and you have English, and these are all very important subjects, but what we also need is how to manage your mind, how to think correctly, how to, when something comes up in your life, how to deal with it and turn it into something to your advantage, how not to go into a negative spiral and have your whole fucking life fall apart because of one thing. And it's very important that people learn how to think, how to control your mind. You know, and how many people actually do that? It's not that many, right? I mean, it's not that many people really know how to think. You know, how to think positively, how to affect the people around you as positively as you can, how to move your life into the way, you know, move your life into a healthy place. Very hard to do. It's because we're all starting from scratch. You know, we're all starting from scratch. We're all trying to read books. We're never taught that shit in school. I mean, if they really want to teach you how to be a good employee, how to, you know, make a good living, that's you being a better person, being better at being a person, being better at managing your life is very important. They should be teaching kids how to think correctly, like early in school, and they should have discipline. And I don't mean discipline by like, you know, do what everybody tells you to do. That's not discipline. What discipline is you have to do a certain amount. You have to do something, like do anything that's really hard, like whether it's swimming or archery or, you know, playing chess or, you know, doing jiu-jitsu. For kids, having something that's difficult to do is very important. They need to be pushed. You know, it's very, very important. You can develop so much more of who you are if you've already pushed your boundaries. If you've been lazy your whole life, it's so hard to get out of not being lazy anymore. And this is all shit that they should be teaching in school, man. They should totally be teaching that shit in school.
Okay.
All right.
We back?
And
All
we're
right.
back.
Right on.
All right.
Chris, you there?
I didn't know if I was unmuted or not.
Yeah,
so yeah, he'll be here with us. Yeah, no, I didn't hear the unmute. So usually I hear that, but all right. So
wow. So Mike, what if I want to contemplate real fast, like an alternate universe where our leaders back in the day, right before 1913, didn't buckle under the pressure and the threats from the central bankers. And if we just said, you know what, screw you guys, we don't care if you're going to put us into war, just stay away from. What would have happened if we resisted at all costs? Because obviously after 1913, then the World War I started. It seems like the second we started with the Federal Reserve is when all these wars started. So
that's exactly right. That's exactly right, and that's not a coincidence. Before the creation of the Federal Reserve, there was no such thing as a world war, because you need to understand, once you have that private central bank issuing the public currency as a loan at interest, the debt builds and builds and builds until the people can't afford to borrow anymore. And in order that the pyramid scheme does not collapse, that's when the Keynesian economists come in and say government has to borrow on the behalf of the people and without their permission. So the government borrows more and more and more until you reach a point where the people won't borrow anymore, the government can't borrow anymore, and that's when they kick off a world war to try and conquer other people's wealth to balance the books and clear the debt. And that's the stage we're at right now.
Is there any way we can undo all this damage, or other than
do what Andrew Jackson did, shut down that central bank, do what Kennedy and Lincoln did, have the government start issuing a value-based currency so that we're not forced to go to the Federal Reserve to borrow our currency at interest. And yes, those bankers will try and kill any president who tries to do that.
Right. So we're not gonna get our own guy in there. We're not about to kidnap Obama and
no, we're not going to do that. That would just put Biden in the White House anyway. We're going to have to just sit and bide our time until the system tears itself apart, which does seem to be in progress right now. And then we have to be ready to decide for ourselves what kind of a government and economy this nation will have, and not allow the carpetbaggers to come in and try and set up the same scam all over again.
See, I want that to happen. My fear is that they are going to actually be in control of the collapse, so this way they can, have controlled opposition and pull their globalists to introduce their one world currency or whatever. And I fear that's their next step.
Well, I know that's what they wanted to do, but they've already hit a major roadblock. The European Union elections were just absolutely swept by the anti-European Union parties. The Catalonia Separatist Party won in Spain. Scotland's getting ready to break off from from the United Kingdom. Venetia is getting ready to separate from Italy. All of a sudden, we're seeing all these regions start to break away and say, we're going to be our own country. That's what this whole issue with Eastern Ukraine is. And that's the reason the U.S. is going in there with military force and mercenaries, because ever since the end of World War II, the United States has tried to overthrow the governments of something like 60 countries, succeeding 25 times. And the model was they would kick out the elected government, they would put in a new puppet regime, and the people of that country would just follow the new government like they followed the old one. But that model doesn't work any longer, because all of a sudden these people are saying, wait a minute, that's not my government in Kiev. I didn't vote for them. Let's just go form our own country. And that's why the U.S. is just absolutely terrified that this is a growing trend, because it doesn't help the U.S. to go in and overthrow a government if the rest of the country then breaks off and says, we're not going to have anything to do with the new puppet regime. So it's a whole new response to the game that the U.S. has been playing for the last half century. And the U.S. government is absolutely terrified that this model not only undermines their ability to control other countries by overthrowing the government, but it's actually working against the agenda for globalization by turning the world into more and more smaller and smaller countries.
Wow. Yeah, that's exactly what I assumed it to be all this time. It seems to be every all these puppet governments, right? But 60 countries. Yeah, wow. I mean, I'm not surprised. I know our CIA was involved with a lot of them. Of course, probably all of them, and causing all the problems. So, Mike, I just had to make a personal question, a little bit off topic here, because I was watching it for the last week, the television show and everything. And I did happen to watch an episode or two of America's Book of Secrets. I wanted, so I can look up later. What episodes were you on exactly for that?
I was on the Gold Conspiracy. Actually it was last December, and I don't really remember all of them. America's Secret Prisons, and the Billionaire Agenda. I was on that one. And I think I'm on two others, and I actually don't remember what they are because it was last December when we filmed these.
Okay, wow. There's actually one of the more entertaining shows that I saw on there.
Yeah, what's significant about America's Book of Secrets is the success of the show, I think, illustrates that the American viewing public is turning away from the propaganda from the corporate TV news, and they're seriously interested in alternative views of current events and history. And the corporate media, which is after a buck as much as anybody else, is saying we have to now start approaching that audience and giving them what they want if we're going to stay in business.
Wow.
So it does seem to be a trend that we're seeing more and more of the corporate media willing to objectively look at some of these alternative views of history.
Okay. So what do you think? I see a lot of they're putting Alex Jones, Mark Dice on there. So isn't that a little risky to be putting these people on the television?
That's actually what I was about to say before. I was surprised when I started seeing the newer season of the show that they were actually covering some of the stuff that they were covering.
Well, anybody who's going to stand up and talk about the unofficial version of history, there's going to be risks. There's going to be harassment. It's unfortunately a reality of modern political life. When I went public about Vincent Foster 20 years ago, it basically ended my career in Hollywood. And we know this is what the FBI likes to do. They destroy careers of anybody who refuses to toe the line. We're seeing all kinds of horrible things being done to any climate scientist who refuses to go along with human-caused global warming and the carbon tax. Their careers are destroyed. Tenure is revoked. Funding is cut. They're not given any voice in the orthodox science publications. It's all politically driven science to sell us an agenda of carbon taxes. And the reason they're pushing that so hard as we come out of yet another record-setting winter, I mean, there's still ice on Lake Superior. We're coming up on the 1st of June.
Yeah,
right. But see, Obamacare was supposed to be a cash cow for the federal government. It was going to generate $200 billion a year in pure profit for the health insurance companies, and they were going to give the federal government a piece of the action through corporate taxes. Well, that didn't work. It's been such an epic fail that now those insurance companies are demanding a taxpayer bailout because they canceled all those non-Obamacare compliant policies. They haven't been replaced. They're losing money like crazy. And so now Barack Obama is back to pushing for a carbon tax, trying to balance the budget, and he's not going to get it.
My mates are still trying for that.
So another huge fail for Obama.
Right?
Yes.
Another. Good. We kind of need that to happen. Need him to fail as many times as possible. I'm liking what I'm hearing about everyone breaking off from the European Union. That's just great.
Well, a lot of those European Union countries are very unhappy with their lot since joining the EU. The recent elections show it. There's a lot of people in Germany are just fed up with working hard and having their wealth looted off to try and balance the books. And behind it all, everybody is realizing is there's no way to ever pay off the debt to a private central bank because the debt is always larger than all of the money in circulation. That's the trap. That's the dirty trick of private central banking. Anyway, we're coming up on the bottom of the hour, and I hate to do this to you, but I do have another engagement I need to be getting to. I think we talked originally I would be on your show for an hour. So I hope you don't mind, but I'm going to have to leave here in about 6 minutes.
No, actually, no. Great that you stayed on a little longer, too. So, yeah, no problem at all, Mike. We enjoy having you on.
Yes.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mike. All right, and I guess if what are your websites again? So for the people listening,
go ahead and plug everything for it. Yeah.
Okay, my personal political website is whatreallyhappened.com, and I do a talk radio show for the Republic Broadcasting Network Monday through Friday from 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. Central U.S. time. And it's a popular show and a popular website, and it's constantly being updated. So when you go in there day after day, it's a completely different presentation, completely different information.
Okay.
Awesome.
Well, thank you, sir. It was an honor to speak with you, and looking forward to seeing what you do in the future. And
all right. Well, thank you, and I look forward to being on your show again.
I hope we're all around in 10 years to continue talking about it.
I hope in 10 years we'll be looking back at the dark old days from a position of being relaxed and sitting on the veranda with a mint julep in our hands.
Thank you. Thank you for those good thoughts.
All right, Mike. Thank you so much for coming on. Have a good evening.
Yes.
Have a good evening as well. Goodbye.